Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host for today, Claire Headley, and I am joined today by none other than Tony Ortega. Hey, Tony, good to see you.
Hello, Claire. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, always a pleasure. Yes, it has been a minute since we've talked and done anything. So, of course, we often make reference to your blog, which I will link in the description to this video as well. And that a post that you put up a few days ago is what inspired me to want to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, it was very nice to hear from you. You never know what is going to hit with readers. I'm at Substack now, tonyortega.substack.com. And I like to cover what's happening right now in Scientology as far as what kind of, promotional materials we can get out so we get a sense of what they're doing. I like to cover the litigation going on. So I have some really big posts this week about Leah Remini's lawsuit. Part of it is on appeal, and we're looking at those documents. But also, I like the history of Scientology. I like to go back and look at things that have happened in the past. And there's some documents from around the era of 2005, 2007 that have been gradually coming out. And it's just so many of them that it takes a while to kind of sift through them. And I thought this was kind of an interesting document from that era. And I put it up. And wow, it got even more reaction than I expected. And then when I heard from you, then I knew I'd really hit pay dirt, because I know something like that, it's not going to impress you too much. But the boy, that one did. What you want me to describe it?
Yes, sure. And actually, before we do that, just I wanted to give a bit more of an intro of you, because I'm sure, like, I've known of you and your work exposing Scientology since 2009, but I think you were doing it even before that. When did your work exposing Scientology as a journalist begin?
This November will be 30 years, Claire.
Wow. There you go. Congratulations for your upcoming anniversary, and thank you for your dedication and persistence. As you know, I know it's not for the faint of heart. And anyway, I just wanted to kind of give you a tip of the hat and a pat on the back or whatever else for just day in, day out, consistently doing the work.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I was so fortunate that in that time, 2009, when I got to know you guys, Mark's book was coming out. I was the editor-in-chief of the Village Voice in New York, so I got to write about Mark's book for that. That was great. And then you guys went through that stupid legal thing where Scientology was basically trying to blackmail you, and I got to write about that. So I was very fortunate that I got to write about some really interesting things in your story. And then, of course, we've kept in touch over the years. And I've had a website over at tonyortega.org, but now I'm at Substack, which I really, really like. It's ad-free. That's the best thing about those long stories, is you're not going to be bugged with ads. But anyway, and it's a good platform for posting documents like this.
Yes, absolutely. So with that said, go ahead, and then we'll pull up, as I mentioned before we started, I have some slides, and I also felt it was fitting to throw in my SP to Claire, just since it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to what your thoughts are on this document.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things I think you learn about very early on when you're learning about Scientology, somebody that's never been in like myself, one of the first things you learn is this idea of a suppressive person. That L. Ron Hubbard, when he was inventing all this stuff back in the early 50s, was talking about survival, and the thing that makes survival difficult is called suppression. And then he decided that the people that had become enemies of the church, which he started calling it after 1953, were suppressive people. These were people that not only, were holding you back, but were holding back the Church of Scientology. Mm-hmm. So it was basically the way the church declares an enemy is an SP. Most of the time when Scientology declares an SP, it's somebody who was in the Church of Scientology that has run afoul of the organization in one way or the other. Yep. And traditionally, Scientology, one of the things that I love about Scientology is that it documents everything, right? It writes everything down, which is great for me as a journalist. Mm-hmm. And so when they decided to declare you as an enemy in the old days, they wanted to make sure you knew about it. And so they would give you what's called a declare or declare order. They would declare you a suppressive person, And to make sure that it stood out, that particular kind of issue was put on goldenrod paper, right? That's a yellow, orangish paper. So people would talk about, did you get your goldenrod when you got declared? Okay, so now you know the lingo, right? And these things were, when people were getting kicked out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you would expect you'd get to not only see your declare, but you'd probably get a copy. Right. And the other thing that was characteristic, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, Claire, was that, you know, who knows why they were really kicking you out? Maybe you looked at L. Ron Hubbard the wrong way, or maybe you said something to David Miscavige he didn't like. But by the time they put together a declare and gave it to you, it listed all these horrible crimes that you're supposedly guilty of, you know.
Yes, completely. 100%. Mark teases me all the time. He's like, "Oh, I thought you were a rule follower and that you were, you know, like, he didn't think I was ever going to leave just because I was born into it and, you know, all my family was in and so forth." But anyway, to your point, he jokes that when I got my declare, he was like, "Man, you're worse than me. You're like the Wicked Witch of the West," according to that document, which we'll get to.
Right. So they do that. They make it. And as another aside, it's probably worth it here, is that, you know, there's been all this stuff lately about Neil Gaiman, who was a Scientologist, grew up in Scientology, and the famous sci-fi fantasy author who's now being accused of terrible sexual problems with these women. And so there's been a lot of coverage, and I have been covering the Gaiman family for years and years and years. And so a lot of reporters have called me, and they all want to ask me about David Gaiman's declare, because see, Neil's father, David Gaiman, was probably the most well-known Scientologist in all of the United Kingdom. He was the spokesman for Scientology in England. And at one point, he was declared, and they put out this goldenrod about him. He then went back in later, because that's the other thing about it, is you can work your way back in. But this declare is awful. It accuses him of all these sexual crimes. And so all these reporters have called me, and I said, listen, you got to understand, the one thing you cannot believe is a declare, okay? Just because it says all these things about him doesn't mean any of it happened. So please keep that in mind. I mean, maybe he did some bad things. I don't know. But you cannot take the declare as evidence of anything. All right. So that's the background.
And to add to that, why? Because, as you said, most of those declared have exited Scientology. So Scientology uses the declare as a vessel by which they, in Scientology's words, dead agent that person, so they will not be listened to, will have no influence or voice with any other Scientologists.
Right. And so they're writing the declare not only to tell you why you're being kicked out and you're an enemy, but then they show it to other people to explain this is why this person's gone now, and this is why you should never talk to them again. Exactly.
Okay. Exactly.
So you know, again, this is very well known in Scientology. We all know about declares and goldenrods, and people like you that are shocked by the things that are listed in your declare. Why this new document is so interesting is that it's the first time I've seen it. It's the actual checklist you're supposed to follow when you write a declare. This is the instructions on what you're supposed to do. I mean, my very first impression when I saw this was, man, writing a declare is a pain in the butt. All these issues and references you have to look up, and then all these steps you have to follow. And of course, it's Scientology, so it's repetitive and a lot of busy work. But yeah, there it is. Here's what you need to do to write a declare. And of course, now that we can see it, it makes perfect sense, right, Claire? Of course, there's a checklist. This is a checklist for everything. But it is interesting to finally have this thing and see what people are supposed to follow when they write a declare.
Yes, completely. Absolutely. And you're right. There's checklists, there's routing forms, everything is documented, everything is outlined. You know, I've often commented that the ideal Sea Org member, in my opinion, is an android, like no emotion, just get it done, do the steps, you know, and if you're not going to do it, then they'll get rid of you and someone else will do it. You know, that's just kind of the nature of the organization and how it works. But yes, I know completely. it's I'm going to put my glasses on because I'm getting old. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the first slide here so we can take a look here. Let me see here. There we go. Okay, let's see here. That works. You can see that all right?
I'm just pulling it up on mine as well so that I have a real close vision of it. Where is it?
You should see it on the screen here. Do you not? Maybe you don't see it on your screen.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I was just pulling it up on my own just so that I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. So checklist for assembling a suppressive declare issue. And again, you just described what this is. Yeah. And by the way, so I just took this screenshot because look at all these policies: writing of an ethics order, how to write an ED order, writing a declare order, completed staff work, how to get approval of projects and actions. I mean, on any one of these policies, Tony, we could probably spend 4 hours going through the policy, right?
My question for you, though, when I saw that was, okay, this, like I said, to me, this looks like a lot of work. On the other hand, all of those might be very familiar to somebody like you. Would you, in other words, when they put that list, you would say, oh, I know all these, no problem. Or would they, would that take you some work or not?
No. I mean, so for example, let's see. The first three: writing of an ethics order, how to write an ED order, writing a declare order. Those are all in OEC volume 1. So it's the green volumes. There's the 7 green volumes from 0 to 7. And then there's the management series. Also, many of these references are included in multiple volumes. Like completed staff work, you study that policy before you even become a member of the C organization. Like it's, 101. But gosh, the amount of times probably any staff member studies some of these is in the hundreds easily. So yeah, absolutely. Very, very familiar. The viewpoint policy, that's always a funny one for me because that's kind of what I used to begin my deconstruction process of cult programming in terms of Scientology. Because if you can take a piece of information and just go, well, because it covers the concept that there's multiple points of view. So in fact, and I haven't looked at this policy in decades, so I did not look at this newly for this interview, but by my recollection and paraphrase, one of the examples given is if you have a car accident, and 8 people witness the car accident, they're each going to have different perspectives of what happened. And, and also kind of just looking at different points of view and information and perspective. So yeah, I was like, it's referred to as the multiple viewpoint system in Scientology. So I was like, well, what's wrong with reading Barefaced Messiah by Russell Meller? It's just a viewpoint.
Exactly. Right. Very good.
It was like I said, it was just, it's ironic to me looking back, like, why was I so afraid to even just read a book? But it speaks again to the level of programming that any Scientologist is put through, particularly in my case, since I started learning the language of Scientology when I was 4 years old, before I even had a good grasp of the English language.
Wow.
So, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so these policies right here is, let's see, the enemy line. If we were to print them all out, we're talking probably 50 pages of documents. That's just the premise for a declare order. So yeah, a lot. Anyway, so let's move along here. Okay, so this paragraph, this is what made me reach out to you. I'll just read it out. 10. I've gathered and studied all ethics files for that individual, for the individual being declared, as well as gathered any other knowledge reports and confessional knowledge reports not in the ethics files. Stop right there. And you go, wait a minute, what do you mean knowledge reports and confessional knowledge reports not in the ethics files? Well, let me explain it to you.
Yeah.
So as you know, the policy is that anytime someone writes a knowledge report, it gets filed in the person's ethics file. However, confessional knowledge reports makes reference to the fact of when someone is getting interrogated as part of their processing, their counseling on the grade chart. So, grade 2 deals with overts and withholds. And so that's, for example, when you do the obnoxious Joburg sec check. And anyway, you go through multiple interrogations. And because you're doing the interrogations as part of your grade chart or your bridge or your, getting up to clear,
Right.
it is what's called non-actionable. So it's Scientology's equivalent of, when you go to the priest and they forgive you for your sins. In fact, there's even a statement that the auditor makes at the end of each of these counseling sessions to forgive the person for those sins. My point being that when you're exiting Scientology or you're being declared by them, all bets are off.
That's right.
Who doesn't matter that it was part of a confessional or again this makes reference to the PC folders being marked as confessional, priest, penitent, privileged, that whole statement that's on every single PC folder, which is where all the counseling is recorded in great gory detail. So this is the examples of like where to me this outlines exactly when people ask, well, what if Tom Cruise were to leave Scientology? Would they have dirt on him? Hell yes. Anything he's ever confessed to, whether it be to an ethics officer, a counselor, or anything else, it listed out right there. What are your thoughts on this,
Well,
Tony?
because look, this is the eternal battle, right? For journalists like me and people who have left like you. You come out, Mark comes out, so many other people come out, talk to journalists like me, and we go over what's been said in the past and what's been written in the past. And every single new person who comes out says, yes, we learned about Xenu 10T3. Yes, we get declared. Yes, they will use anything you've said at any time against you if they decide you're an enemy and they want to smear you online. This is, every single person has said this every single time. But what happens is the church goes into court or goes to big media companies and says, and they argue in court, look, the Catholic religion has this priest penitent privilege. So do we. I mean, anything these people say in their sessions is completely confidential. We would never use that material, right? And the big publications feel obliged not only to give Scientology's statement, but to kind of give it weight. And that just always drives me crazy. It's like, they're lying. They're lying.
Right.
And then but they lie to the courts as well. It drives me crazy. So this is what happens time and time again. The people who come out tell us what's really going on. Scientology says, no, 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 no. And then eventually we get a document like this, which once again proves that the people like you who are coming out are the ones telling the truth.
Yep.
And that Scientology lies about everything.
Yep.
I don't know how many times we have to learn that lesson, but it just happens again and again.
I know. It's absolutely, I know it's not surprising to you and I, but it is when you just go at every turn, and I think one of the more infamous ones was the we don't practice disconnection, the Tommy Davis,
Right.
big
Well,
faux pas.
another one that comes to mind here, and I'm glad you pointed that out because I didn't really notice that when I published it.
Yeah.
But I have experience with that, particularly in Laura DiCrescenzo's lawsuit, and that one comes to mind because Laura was suing Scientology for 9 years in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Times, in that 9 years, never wrote a single word about her or her lawsuit. The only things about her lawsuit that ever appeared in the LA Times were AP stories that they republished. They never bothered to send a reporter. Anyway, one of the contentions in that lawsuit was pretty early on. Laura and her attorneys had demanded all of her files.
Right.
Because she was suing over being abused in the Sea Org, and in particular, being coerced into having an abortion at only 17, when she was technically a child. And hey, that'll be in there. That will be in those files if they can get them. Yep. So they fought and fought and fought. And the judge said, of course you can have your files. Sure. Wrote an order. Scientology fought it. Went to appellate court, lost. Went to state appellate court, lost. Went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And what makes me so sick every time I think about this Bert Deichsler, right, who's got this great reputation as a wonderful attorney in Los Angeles. Ooh, he has a bookstore. Bert Deichsler was their attorney on that. And he was telling the California Supreme Court and then the U.S. Supreme Court that the reason Scientology should not be forced to turn over those files is because they contained confidential religious material. They had to admit that Laura's files had been shared with over 200 Scientology officials. That's confidential? But 200 people had looked through them?
Right.
But what makes me so sick is he kept talking about, oh, that material is so religious. Judge, we can't, that's a violation because that's religious material. And the U.S. Supreme Court didn't fall for it either. They finally had to turn over those files. What's in them? Sick annotations of how this poor child was abused. She was sad because she was 13 years old and missed her mother, and so they punished her for it. That's what was in the files. That's what Bert Deichsler was telling courts was religious material. That's the kind of thing that should get an attorney kicked out. That's what drives me crazy is when they have these attorneys lying for them. Yeah. And because we know Scientology lies, but when they have these really high reputation attorneys willing to lie. And I wish someday when Scientology is finally, in bankruptcy because the church, the FBI has raided them. I wish someday I could sit down with Bert Deichsler and say, Bert, tell me the truth. Did you say that because you had actually seen what was in those files and that struck you as being religious? Or did you say that just because David Miscavige told you to do it?
Right. Completely. And I guarantee it's the latter. Because he wouldn't have looked in the folders. Why would he?
Probably not. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. They get on their high horse about, and again, you're right. It's Scientology's documented practice of using religious protections to cover up abuse and crimes. Day in, day out, they've been doing it for decades. And now, as we talked about too, this whole arbitration nonsense that now that's the next level that they're adding. Because ask me, Tony, in my 30 years in Scientology, how many times did I see an arbitration?
Never.
Exactly. Right. Never.
And thank goodness. I don't know if Laura's case would have been susceptible or not.
Right.
She sued in 2009. They didn't start using that arbitration thing in court until the Garcia case in 2013.
Right. But, so neither Laura's case nor our case
had that issue. Right.
No, we did not.
They just maybe hadn't dreamed that up yet. But what happened
with
Laura's case?
That's exactly what they hadn't done. They hadn't dreamed that up yet. They hadn't used their $1 million law firms to concoct their next loony bin excuse as to how they can use, get away with just covering up what how they abuse people. And anyway, we could go on and on about that.
Let me for those who are curious and maybe don't know her case that well because it's been a while, she sued for 9 years, 2009 to 2018. She had to win 2 motions for summary judgment. I don't even know why they got to do it a second time, but I was in court for both of those. Twice she had to run that gauntlet and had to be deposed, and all this stuff took years and years and years. Finally, and then she got her files. They went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court for that. Incredible case. Again, not one word in the LA Times. And then finally, in 2018, they had a trial date. They finally had a trial date, and the coup de grace was was that Laura's attorneys, just before the trial, served Dave so he would have to attend. And that's when Dave wrote a check to make it all go away. Yep. But I mean, there's no way Dave could allow a trial anyway. There's no way a jury is not going to hear this stuff and be absolutely fucking horrified. Right. So that's exactly why Scientology can't let your case go to a trial, can't let Laura's case, can't let Leah's case. There's no way. Like right now, in Leah's case, I'm making all these arguments about things, but Dave knows there's a jury sitting there listening to how a church, supposedly a church, is calling Leah Remini a bigot and a racist and all these ridiculous things online and sliming her and her kid.
Right.
Oh, that wouldn't last 5 minutes in front of a jury, and Dave knows it.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
But it is so great. Get back to this subject. It is so great to have it in black and white. There it is. Yep. They pull from everywhere. They pull every bit of dirt they possibly can on you to write and declare confidentiality. Give me a break.
Right. Exactly. It's no holds barred. Nothing. No. There's nothing they won't do to completely smear and destroy the character of the person to be declared. Exactly right.
Right.
So then here, I'm just going to pop this back up here.
Yep.
Yeah, I've also gathered data from the CS, the case supervisors, and any other staff member who had dealings with that individual. What does that mean? The moment the person escaped or took off or whatever, or, ran away, or Scientology will go around and make every single staff member write knowledge reports on that person. And of course they're gone. So, technically, I mean, well, whatever, that's the wrong word to say. Allegedly by the policy written, you're supposed to be able to face your accuser. Well, of course that doesn't happen. Point being that's what this is in reference to.
The way I understand it, Claire, is there's two different reports people write on each other. A knowledge report, a KR, the person being written about gets a copy. But then there's also something called a things that should not be reported. And the person being written about does not get a copy of that.
That's right. Allegedly. I've often made reference to this, though. Like, I wrote a things that shouldn't be report on my stepfather, Hugh Witt, the very same Hugh Witt who was named to counter my expert witness testimony in the Danny Masterson trial, completely to mess with my head. In, I think, 99, or I was in Religious Technology Center. So he didn't even physically know where I worked for 14 years, by the way, side comment. I wrote a things that shouldn't be report on him. He was given a copy of that, by the way. And then he promptly didn't talk to me for 2 years. The punchline being that my mother had to tell me 2 years later, by the way, he's not speaking to you because you wrote a report on him. I was like, what? That point being, like, how often did I see my family? Never. I didn't even notice in 2 years that my stepfather wasn't speaking to me. But yeah, that's the things that shouldn't be report. So yeah, you're right. Anyway, back to this. This would include reports and ethics files kept by other churches, such as an advanced organization or flag, as these would be relevant to writing the issue. And yeah, that's in reference to you could end up with multiple ethics files in multiple organizations. Though I will say that even in the later years that I was there, they were working on a computerized personnel and ethics database. Did you ever hear about this project, Tony?
I don't think so.
Oh yeah. So the point was to scan in every knowledge report from every organization anywhere, also going through the person's auditing folders, their PC folders, and any other files, and computerizing a complete record of that person's entire Scientology history that would then be accessible by multiple organizations. Guess who was running that project? Shelly Miscavige.
That wasn't called Incom, or is that something else?
That's something else. Yeah, no, this was the personnel/ethics database project.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I assume they've got something like that now, but even today, we can see when they're opening these ideal orgs, they still have these massive central files projects. So Scientology it's clear, even if they have computerized to a certain extent, Scientology is still completely committed to the idea of paper files on everybody.
Yes, 100%. And they can't change that because that's Hubbard policy, obviously.
Yeah.
Though, anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Okay, so then let's see what else here. I think that was the main. To obtain this information, send a telex to the Director of Inspections and Reports or a Master at Arms of those orgs, informing them that you're putting together an SP declare on that person and why, and for them to send you reports and any other relevant data. I know, it's just mind-boggling, right? Here, let me see what I have next here. And then here, I think you highlighted this in your post, so I included it because, yeah, let's go through these. I've written the declare issue in accordance with the above references and attest that, I think your favorite on this was, the issue does not spread. Oh, no, the issue does not engender sympathy for the person being declared.
That's just amazing. I mean, you wouldn't think if somebody had really committed crimes and you were listing these horrible crimes a person committed, you wouldn't think for a moment that I hope people aren't going to like the person because of that. But of course, the way these are written, the crimes are so ridiculous that they have to be careful that they aren't turning these people into martyrs and heroes.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Which is, yeah. And my favorite was the issue does not spread black PR. So black propaganda. So just to kind of back up for a moment there, this would be, for example, if Billy Bob says, well, I'm out of here because David Miscavige punched me in the face. So they can't say, oh, Billy Bob alleged
right.
David Miscavige punched me in the face and 50 people watched him do it, because that would be black propaganda or black public relations, whatever. I can't.
Right, because
It's
then
interchangeable.
somebody looking at it might say, well, is David Miscavige hitting people? And that's not the thought you want to cross their mind. These are written, again, we'll say it again, it's not just for the person that's been kicked out, but for other people to read, so they look at it and go, oh, look at the horrible things this person did. Thank goodness they're gone.
Yes.
And the
exactly
last thing
right.
you want is any kind of sympathy there at that point.
That's exactly right. And preferably even read it and go, oh, yeah, that's right. I remember back in 1962, he was mean to me too. So let me write another knowledge report on him for that too.
And I like this other one I didn't notice before. The listed high crimes are all in capital letters.
Right. I know, that struck me too. I was like, and I of course I've seen many, goldenrod is actually loosely termed. It's not just a declare. It's any action taken by the ethics department. So committee of evidence, which I've had, I think, 3 committees of evidence in my years in the C organization. And yeah, it's funny because I saw that and I was like, I didn't realize that was actually a thing, probably dictated somewhere in Hubbard's policy. Like, it needs to be capital letters, like, the yesteryear version of yelling over text, right? Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, and the facts are covered, and dead agent data on the person is included in the body of the issue. I mean, we kind of touched on this already, but just to reiterate.
I mean, it's a key concept in Scientology that comes from Hubbard, and that is, people leave Scientology, they're unhappy, they criticize the church, rather than answer those allegations. So in other words, somebody comes out of the church and says, they use this terrible leverage to rip my family apart. Scientology never comes back and says, no, they're misinterpreting the thing. No, they come back and said, that person is, they're committing this crime or that crime. They go after the person's reputation. And what Hubbard said about that was, if you can smear them, they become a dead agent. In other words, nobody will listen to them. So It doesn't matter if their criticism is valid. if you've gone after their reputation, and that's what they do to me, to you, to Leah, to Mike, to Ron, every single person. They never tried to answer the allegations we were making about what the Church of Scientology does. They all went after our character with just nonsense, to try to make, and then you can see it. So, for example, they throw certain stupid things at me that are untrue, but then I will see somebody like a whale, somebody that I've, talked about, they've given millions of dollars, and something will come up about me online. They say, oh, I know all about that guy. He did X, Y, and Z. That's why the dead agent material is for, to give Scientologists something they can use to automatically dismiss that person. That's what they want to do.
Yep, exactly. They want no one who's exited Scientology to have a voice ever under any circumstances. Not only they would like to think that they have that control over the general public, but that's not really what's important to them. It's to keep the remaining members in, like keep my mother in Scientology and not talking to me, keep my sisters, my brother, people that knew me personally, who I would be able to influence to leave Scientology.
Right.
Anyway. Yes, crazy. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I had a very specific reason for including this, Tony, just to kind of highlight something. So I've submitted the completed staff work to AVC Int Ethics Authority. This is Authorization Verification Correction International Ethics Authority. So AVC is the unit that has to approve any and all anything that's issued in Scientology, even communications that would go to management. And I was in AVC, in Religious Technology Center, from 97 until the year 2000. In 2004, when I was removed from Religious Technology Center for the quote unquote crime of refusing to divorce my husband, Mark, of 13 years, the entire AVC unit was also removed from Religious Technology Center and placed under Commodore's Messenger Organization International. So it was moved under management for one reason and one reason only, because it was in Religious Technology Center, which created a paper trail that proved and documented that David Miscavige approves everything.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. And again, obviously moving AVC from Religious Technology Center to Commodore's Messenger Org doesn't change anything, because still everything that gets done in Scientology is based on David Miscavige's orders. I wasn't sure if you were aware of that move and the purpose in the history of Scientology.
I mean, I know that AVC is one of those really important things in Scientology that rarely gets discussed, rarely gets exposed. But I know how important it is. But I was not aware of that move. But that sounds exactly like what is going on right now in Leah Remini's lawsuit, where she not only sued the Church of Scientology International that runs all of these scummy online accounts that are smearing her, but she also sued RTC and Dave. And then in court, RTC said, well, there's nothing in here that is specifically about us. We want out. And so the judge thankfully gave Leah a little time so that you and Mike Rinder could write declarations and say, look, Church of Scientology International doesn't do a thing without the approval of the RTC and David Miscavige, exactly like what you're saying right here. And that's the thing, is like, they've set it up this way so they can go into court and say things like that, like, oh, RTC, all RTC does is assure the purity of the tech. RTC would never get involved in anything as sordid as a smear campaign. And of course, you and Mike in your declarations say, of course they do. RTC runs everything. David Miscavige runs everything. So,
yes.
and we'll see how that plays out in court. But it's so frustrating.
Yeah. By the way, do you know how? I'm sure you've seen this before, but I don't think you and I have ever talked about this. and you likely already know this, but it's worth mentioning in this context anyway, in my opinion. On any organization org board, the chart, the structure that they have up on the walls by mandate of L. Ron Hubbard in every organization, Religious Technology Center is depicted on every single organizing chart as a triangle, like a little flag in the upper, upper left corner. Have you seen that before?
I don't know if I've ever noticed that.
Yeah, well, the reason why it's that shape and size is because Religious Technology Center isn't governed by the chain of command that mandates every other organization in Scientology. That triangle represents that they can go in at any level, anywhere, as a policing organization of Scientology.
And that was key to the 2002 what was it, affidavit that Vaughn Young submitted that finally won Lawrence Wollersheim's case after all those years, was that Vaughn Young put together this beautiful affidavit where he explained the real structure of Scientology. And he said, look, there's this whole alphabet soup, CSI, ASI, CST, RTC. But all that matters is that the Sea Org runs everything and can step in at any time. It says it right here. The Sea Org at any time can walk into any org and take over. And the Sea Org is run by only one person, the captain of the Sea Org. And the captain of the Sea Org is David Miscavige. He put that together. You know, Lawrence Wollersheim had been fighting for decades to get his money out of Scientology. And they had always vowed no, not one thin dime for Wollersheim. And that one affidavit was so effective and showed that, you know, Scientology was always making these excuses. Well, like, this organization doesn't have control of the money, and that we don't know where the money is. And it's like, no, David Miscavige runs everything. He knows where the money is. And the day that affidavit was going to be discussed in open court, and I went down to the courthouse, Scientology came in with a $9 million check to make it go away. They did not want that affidavit being discussed because it's such a great indictment of how Scientology is really set up for one man. And Scientology knows that's dangerous. If the IRS gave a shit, that's exactly the kind of thing that they're not supposed to be doing. Anyway, so you're right. I mean, it's an alphabet soup. Look at that. I mean, AVC, RTC, WDC, Watchdog Committee, right? Yes. I mean, it doesn't matter. David Miscavige is captain of the Sea Org, and he doesn't like being called captain in court. We found out about that.
Yeah, it's funny you talking about that declaration. Of course, I knew nothing about Larry Wollersheim, his case, none of that. But I was working in Religious Technology Center at that time and had to work with the management executives and the marketing people after that, like right around this time, to change everything about how they were talking in promotional materials about the Sea organization. And that's also right around the time that David Miscavige stopped wearing Sea Org uniform.
I think the last time I've seen him in one was in 2006 on Maiden Voyage week on the Free Winds.
Yep.
He wore one, which I thought was interesting because he had the captain's jacket, but a bow tie. That's the last time I remember seeing him. And he was listed on the screen as Captain David Miscavige.
There you go. Somebody probably got sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force for that slip up.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. I just have a couple more here. Thanks for doing this with me, Tony. I appreciate it.
It's fun.
All right, so this is just one of the policies that was referenced in that checklist: suppressive acts, suppression of Scientology and Scientologists. And of course, you can Google this and see this in all of its glorious mundane detail.
That's the big one, right?
It is the big one. It is the big one. This is a little off topic, but I saw this when I was looking at the policy. The families and adherents of suppressive persons or groups may not receive processing. It does not matter whether they are or are not Scientologists. If the families or adherents of suppressive persons or groups are knowingly processed, any auditor doing so is guilty of a misdemeanor. So, for context, David Miscavige's father, Ron Miscavige, may he rest in peace, an amazing person who wrote the book Ruthless, is obviously a suppressive person by Scientology policies, as you would say of David Miscavige's niece, Jenna Miscavige, who also wrote a book, Beyond Belief. And I could list more and more family members, by the way. The point being that David Miscavige, according to this, cannot be processed.
He's an illegal PC. But you know what, Claire? He doesn't get processing, right? And he hasn't since like the early 90s, right?
Correct. That's right. He has not since 1993, to my knowledge, received any Scientology counseling. And this is just one policy, by the way. There are many other policies, personnel policies, that say that by this same premise, anyone who is connected to a suppressive person does not qualify for an executive position in Scientology. So, yeah, the head of Scientology, by this premise, is a potential trouble source. So no wonder Scientology is shrinking and failing, right?
It's good to be king. And when you're king, obviously the rules don't apply to you. And he not only is violating these rules, but look, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that may be the number. People ask me, okay, you get to interview Miscavige. First thing you ask him, what are you going to ask him? And I've thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that maybe the best first question to ask David Miscavige is, are you still a Scientologist? Do you get auditing?
Yep. And we get asked this question all the time. And so I'm curious to know your answer to this. Do you think he's a staunch believer, or do you think he's just a power hungry psychopath?
That's the eternal question. And I think it applies to Hubbard as well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one thing that I've done that maybe most journalists don't have time for is I actually have gone back and read hundreds of Hubbard's lectures. The early ones, my favorite vintage is 1963. That's when he's the most off the hook with all the space opera and stuff. I've read all those. And yeah, you have to ask yourself, when he's telling people, for example, that you can create a car out of thin air, that's not a big deal. The big deal is that's always his move. It's like people will teach me how can I make a car out of thin. No, that's the easy part. Let's talk about the hard part, right? That's always his move, right? Is he always acts like so when you're thinking about that, they come on. He knows he can't create a car out of thin air. So what is he doing? Right? Yeah. He's messing with people, right? Isn't he messing with people? And once you get that thought in your head, now go back and read those early lectures. Oh, it's just all over the place. In virtually every lecture, he's seeing how far he can push these people. Like, I'm going to throw this out there and see if these idiots buy it. You can really see this kind of sneering disregard for his own followers. So I've always thought, okay, there's the con man thing, right? He knowingly, he's conning these people. He knows it. He's actually kind of enjoying it. He's seeing how far he can push them. It's just he doesn't believe a word of it. On the other hand, I remember Lawrence Wright talking about this, that, if it was just about money, he had made so much money, he could walk away. No, and then Lawrence had interviewed Steve Foth. And I think this is the interview that I think really moved a lot of people. And that's the idea of L. Ron Hubbard in his final days out at the ranch in Creston, California. And he's asking Steve Foth to go check. He thought he saw Phaeton out by the fence. Can you go check that? Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Okay, he was probably starting to become senile, but it suggests that there was some level where he had started to buy into all of this.
Right.
And I think with a unique figure like L. Ron Hubbard, It is possible to be both. It is possible both to know that you're lying to people, know that you're conning people, but then also sort of believe, yeah, I did discover the secrets of the universe. I really have traveled to Venus. These things are real. I think it's possible for both those things to inhabit in L. Ron Hubbard. Okay, so then you go to Dave. You see similar evidence on both sides. I mean, we know that he sees the actual enrollment figures. We know that David Miscavige, of all people, knows this whole line that Tommy Davis would spout. We've had more expansion in the last 5 years than we've had in 50. You know, they're just making it up. We know that David Miscavige knows the real numbers are terrible. He's lying. He's just a con man. On the other hand, there are the stories about the copper rods at in base at Gold, the copper rods where he wanted to be able to discharge charge into the ground or whatever, and that he did not like to be around children. He really felt that body thetans could leap off of children and get onto him. So I don't know how much stock to put in that. I've heard different things from people that knew him and say, I wouldn't put that much stock in it. I think it is possible that with David Miscavige, like with L. Ron Hubbard, it's a combination where he knows the real numbers. He knows he's lying to people. He knows that they don't achieve these things in Scientology. On the other hand, it's so tempting to think that, you are the most important human being on the entire planet, right? Isn't that what Tom Cruise told Nazanin Boniadi? That the most important person on the planet today is David Miscavige?
Right.
Maybe Dave buys that. So I think it is possible to be both. But on the other hand, if he hasn't had auditing since 1993, how can he be the ecclesiastical leader of Scientology?
Right.
I mean, that's just nuts.
You make a good point too. I will say that, in the 8 years that I worked very closely with David and Shelley Miscavige, absolutely hands down, I think he's in the top 3. He might actually be number 1. I'd have to think about that for a moment. The most paranoid individual I have ever met. And like assuming that people were out to get him, assuming, that people were spying on him and watching him and this and that and the other thing. And that actually was originally why I understood he was refusing auditing, because he didn't trust any of the counselors or the people who were going.
How can you possibly trust an auditor with your innermost secrets? There's no way.
Right. Exactly. So he was never, but it was always deflected and it was always their fault. But it's funny because if you
just
pause
as an aside here at this point, as an aside here, just because I've been in Scientology facilities. I've read all the books. I've read all of Hubbard's lectures. But people sometimes will ask me, but have you been audited? And especially indies are very critical of a journalist and say, but haven't had auditing, right? And I'm like, because I'm not crazy, right? Like one person did try to give me an auditing session, and like the first question I said, we're shutting this down. I'm not bearing my, giving you my innermost secrets. Why? Who are you? How do you deserve them? You know what I'm saying? It's such an unequal power position to be audited by somebody. And it is designed for one thing. I know indies in particular will tell you, it's designed to make you feel better. No, it's designed to get damaging material out of you that can be used against you later. Why would I subject myself to that? I never
completely
would. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. But so back to David Miscavige and his paranoia, just to complete the thought. The funny thing is that the exactly how he carries himself out is literally almost a depiction of how L. Ron Hubbard describes a suppressive person. Hubbard's description of a suppressive person is that they are frozen on the time track, fighting aliens from, or fighting Martians, I think was the exact term used. And therefore they're just fighting everybody. That's what David Miscavige does on a day in, day out basis, at least by my personal observation.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Let's see here. I think we're almost done with these slides. Let me get it back up here just to make sure. Okay. Oh yeah. This was just another bit of a off topic, but where a person is secretly planning to leave and making private preparations to do so without informing the proper terminals in an org, and does leave below and does not return within a reasonable length of time, an automatic declare is to be issued. So the reason I brought this in was for context. My last slides are my suppressive person declare. So obviously it's talking about unauthorized, someone's planning to escape, which to me, again, just using the word blow deflects from the fact that they're not allowed to leave at any time. Even if you go on Scientology's website right now, it says in clear, bold letters, a staff member can leave at any time, but not according to this.
Nope.
Not according to this.
Right.
Okay. And so, Tony, question for you. What would you consider a reasonable length of time? Does not return within a reasonable length of time.
Well, that they leave it subjective, because with David Miscavige, it's like when Mark Headley runs down the road, it's the first 10 seconds. He's not back. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Which is kind of my point, because here, let's get to the next one now. Okay. So here we go. I jumped one. Sorry, hold on. 27 January 2005, 3 days after I'd escaped. And by the way, the day after I'd escaped, my family was shown this, according to my mother.
And now that you see how much rigmarole they have to go through to produce this, it's even more impressive, right?
Right, exactly. So suppressive person declare. Claire Headley Witt is hereby declared a suppressive person. Claire was a staff member of the Church of Scientology International, because that's where, AKA the hole, is where I escaped from. I was in the hole. I had been kicked out of Religious Technology Center, as I said, for refusing to divorce my husband, Mark Headley, of 13 years at the time. Church of Scientology International, she intentionally deserted her position in the church in violation of HCOPL leaving and leaves. When given the chance to standardly handle her situation, per LRH policy, Claire refused and chose to be declared. Oh my God, the word salad. When given the chance to standardly handle her situation. Oh, you mean when you sent 5 staff to intercept me and I had to sit on my purse in the Las Vegas bus station surrounded by Greg Wilhair, Sharon Johnston, whoever else knows that was outside waiting in the car to drag me back? That's when I was given the chance to standardly handle my situation? Oh my gosh. Investigation found that Claire has a history of out-tech and squirreling. This is what I mean when Mark was like, damn, honey, wow. And what does that even mean? Like, what does that even mean? Not one specific. Claire has audited above her classification and committed out-tech, including auditing PCs on false purpose rundown procedure without any certificates. Yeah, because Shelly Miscavige told me to stop creating reasons why I couldn't do my job and to just get it done. That's why. She also audited OTs without training or certification to do so. When Claire was responsible for the training and correcting of staff, she directed others to audit above their training level. Thus, it's cut off anyway. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final one, Claire has given up her rights as a Scientologist by her actions, and she may not receive the benefits of the codes of the church. Blah, blah, blah. Her only terminal in the church is the International Justice Chief, except that he wasn't allowed to talk to me because I'd been at the base. So actually, it was Kirsten Catano, Warren McShane, and Greg Wilhair who talked to me. And I don't know if I ever told you this story, Tony, but 2 months after we had escaped and we now had co-signed an apartment with Mark's dad, Bernie, and gotten jobs, and we were doing great and getting back on, getting our feet on the ground, Warren McShane called and said, your SP declare was put on hold, which I have that in writing from Greg Wilhare in January. They wanted us to go back and do a leaving staff security check, interrogation. So I kept saying, hey, what's the deal? What's the deal? What's the deal? It's on hold, because I was holding out hope that I might be able to speak to my family again. And so Warren McShane called in April. So again, like January, February, March, April, 3 months later, and says, yeah, it will stay on hold, but you have to come back and do the rehabilitation project force. That was a hell no, you're insane. Anyway,
but it works on a lot of people. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that escaped, and then they get that call like, oh, you should come back and route out properly. And so they do. And then they have to escape all over again.
Right.
And they totally regret going back. And like, say, Valerie Haney, for example. Valerie Haney had this incredible escape. She hid in the trunk of a car of an actor in order to get out of Int Base, last possible day for her that she could do it. Amazing escape. Her father was still a Scientologist, and he's like, listen, I really think you should go back and route out properly. So she did. And she went back. They promised her it would only take 3 weeks. Months later, she's like, you got to let me go. You got to let me go. And so they made her sit down and sign a document that they have been using against her ever since in court. Yep. So, that's the thing is if there's some way we could communicate to these people that are leaving, don't worry about your freeloader debt and don't go back. You don't have to go back. There's no purpose in it. It only serves them.
Yeah. Yeah. Paraphrasing a brilliant quote by Mike Rinder, he said, the way you can tell a cult is what they do when you try to leave.
Yep.
So, yep, you're absolutely right. Anyway, that's all I had, Tony, but thanks as always for a fascinating conversation. It's always great to touch base with you and hear your thoughts and perspectives, and thanks for listening to mine.
Well, you know how much I admire the work that you and Mark have both done, and it's interesting to see you being talked about in more court documents, and you're right in the middle of things. So I'm just hats off. I know how much harassment you guys have been through, and it just seems like every time I hear from you guys, you're doing great. So I'm really happy about that.
I appreciate it, Tony, and same to you. Thanks for the work that you have relentlessly done for so many years. And we'll keep at it, keep going. And there you go. Until next time. Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to check out the merch store link in the description. We have Hail Xenu, Xenu is my homeboy, and BFG branded mouse pads, shirts, mugs, all sorts of other stuff in there that helps us to bring you new content on a regular basis. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology, in hardback, Kindle, and Audible versions as well. There's also a link to our podcast, and you can get that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to watch another video, you can click on this link right here, or you can click on this one here, or you can click on the subscribe button right here. Thanks a lot. Until next time.